Let me first introduce to you our moderator, Snigdha Somani. Snigdha is a recent graduate from Roanoke College, where she graduated with a BBA through the college's honors program. She is a freelance writer and specializes in search engine optimization-based technical writing. She'll be hosting tonight's panel. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker, Professor Nadeem Zaman. Professor Zaman is the author of 2 works of fiction. One is a novel entitled In the Time of Others, which was longlisted for the 2019 DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. The next is a collection of stories entitled Up in the Main House, which we'll be discussing in the panel today. His third novel, The Inheritors, will be published by Hachette India in 2022, so this year. Stay tuned. Professor Zaman was born in Dhaka, Bangladesh. His fiction has appeared in the Louisville Review, Singapore Unbound, Wilderness House Literary Review, Roanoke Review, Dhaka Tribune, Bengal Lights, among many other journals. Without further ado, please enjoy the panel in conversation with Professor Nadeem Zaman.
Thank you so much, Nacha. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and welcome everyone to the 2nd annual DC South Asian Literary Festival presented by the DC South Asian Arts Council, Inc. I would like to welcome our esteemed guest for tonight, Nadeem Zaman, for our book spotlight dedicated to his book, Up in the Main House. Everyone attending, thank you for being here tonight, and feel free to drop any questions for Nadeem in the Q&A section below, and we will try our best to have them answered. Okay, well, before we begin to talk about the book, Nadeem, tell me a little about your story, why you moved to the US, how being an immigrant affects your writing, and let's go from there.
Okay. Well, thank you again for Snigdha for finding me. Thank you to Manoj and your team for reaching out. It was one of those emails that I got that I looked at and I said, I don't know that I've ever had communication with this organization, but wow, they're inviting me to be part of a literary festival. And it was just one of those moments in the day that was just lovely. So thank you. As far as my journey here, I was 15 years old when we moved here. It was a very harried, unplanned sort of move. So I spent several years being in a lot of culture shock, unsurprisingly, more so because by 15, I had a life, I had a social circle, I had, my way of being, living in Dhaka. And while I traveled to the UK and the US before, living here was not really anything that my parents were ever planning until I'd come to the higher education, which, for so many South Asian parents, at least in my generation too, and now as well, that are still living there, that's a major option to look into higher education outside of, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, where have you. So we made the move, and Chicago was where I spent my first nearly 20 years in the US. So Chicago was home base, and still, my family is there. My mom and my sister are there still, and my circles. And as far as the experience informing my writing, that didn't happen till much, much later. I was kind of stumbling around about, what it is that I want to write about. And, having grown up in Bangladesh, we were always reading above and beyond anything else. We were reading, the English, British English, mostly white male writers, Dickens and his old coterie, Shakespeare, Dickens, people that I still, were formative to my writing. At first, I was, as I said, my writing didn't really kind of dig into it. It happened much, much later. And there were little bits and pieces here that cropped up when I was in undergrad as an English major. But even they were kind of, I would say, unfulfilled, because what I thought I needed to write in order to be a writer in America was white characters, were
Mhm.
mainstream characters. And so I was writing, stories that I really enjoyed writing, but I was trying to mimic experiences that I didn't really have any insight to outside of having friends, good close friends, reading other authors. Again, in the 90s in college, most of the curricula had predominantly white authors, again, whose works I absolutely adore, and I still read them. So that was informing my kind of budding zeal to be a writer. But of course, for people of a certain generation, mine, 9/11 was major. I was 25 when 9/11 happened. And something shifted. Something shifted that I wasn't tuned into before. And a lot of it had to also do with kind of, that young rebellion and rejection, especially growing up here in the West, coming from, a culture that I feel like, oh my goodness, I'm always going to stick out like a sore thumb. No one can say Nadeem Zaman, I went by a nickname that I've had forever, but it just luckily enough, it sounded not Deshi.
Mhm.
And so it took a while, but at the same time, I was always, from a very Bengali family. So I spoke, read, wrote Bangla all the time. And so you can understand, fraught with all of these things that's happening between 15, and on into my 20s and 30s. But it really started to take shape post undergrad. And that's when I started to really kind of go back and some of the stories that Up in the Main House has, I almost see this book as my apprenticeship, because I was like, wait a minute, there's a gold mine of people and stories that I am always thinking about, but I never gave myself permission to write, because I didn't think that there were stories that were, supposed to be written, and audiences all over the place will read them without thinking, what is this and what's going on. Also, of course, finally starting to read South Asian authors. I'm not alone in this, but Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children just exploded my brain. And then, Arundhati Roy and Anita Desai and all of these stalwarts that have been writing for years. And I just went, that's all the permission I need. And so these stories that are happening, well, I'll write them. We'll see who reads them or not. And they kind of continue now.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm so glad you decided to, finally accept this other facet of your identity, because I think I can definitely identify with your experience, because I moved here when I was 12 years old. So it's around the same, I relate to all of the experiences that you're talking about.
Yes.
But as you were pursuing your undergrad, I'm guessing you said English, right? And so were you thinking about, being a professor, or, just going to the field of creative writing in general?
No, there was a long gap between undergrad and graduate school. So, undergraduates, it was, I would say the last 2 years of undergraduate was when I really kind of tuned into actually being a student. Before that, it was between, just not kind of getting what I'm supposed to be doing at college, as it were. And also, coming from a Bangladeshi, Bengali, South Asian family, you have to go to college. There's no choice. And so I didn't have the luxury of that I saw my other, non-South Asian friends sometimes having, being like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go and, backpack through Europe or something. That's just not going to fly. It's different now, because, I'm now, generations have come along that are, born and raised here. And so while maybe some of the traditions still exist, young people, they're just being from here because they're from here, from birth. So, I finally, the last 2 years, I had a good time with all my English courses. I got to know my professors well. I really put, my concentration into, writing the essays and doing the work. And then it was just kind of, again, about 10 to 12 years of just working the most wretched jobs I could find just so I could have a paycheck. I hated every single job I've ever worked until, no hyperbole, I became a GTA, and then after graduate school, entered teaching full time eventually. So I didn't really kind of come at it thinking that I'll someday be a professor. But then when I was in graduate school, I started to go, well, I just need to face the fact, own up to it, that I want a life of the mind. And what's better than trying to get my foot in the door here and then doing it, coming into a classroom every day, and talking about literature and teaching literature and teaching writing, and getting young people enthusiastic about this field, which is unfortunately so kind of misrepresented, and there's so many misconceptions about studying literature, about being a writer, across the board. Doesn't matter ethnicity, background. Why? Well, because the first thing that parents or people are going to talk about is, well, how are you going to make a living doing that?
Yeah.
And so if money is all we're talking about, and I'm happy to have money, don't get me wrong, but I just could not imagine, as my dad wanted me to be an engineer, doing that for 40 years and not being fulfilled. I wouldn't make a good engineer either. If I went into the field, I would pass with like doing more extra credit work to pass than I would actually doing the work, which I would be completely incompetent with.
Those of us who have escaped without being a doctor, engineer, or lawyer were the anomaly. So
right.
I totally get that.
Yes, and I love that we are.
Yes, definitely. So I've read your book, but I know so many people in the audience probably don't know, what we're talking about. So if you had to give the audience like an elevator pitch of what the book is about, kind of just summarize it for us.
Yeah, it's a collection of short stories, fictional, that take place in contemporary Dhaka, I would say over the last 15, 20 years or so. And it's just looking at the daily lives of people who are in the background, taking care of the people whose stories are always seen. So we see cooks, servants, nannies, drivers. We also see upstairs and downstairs, but it's really the downstairs people that drive, because they're the ones holding up the upstairs. It's very much also speaking to the experience I was born into, because I was born into a privileged, wealthy family. And so I had no idea how and who was running our home 90% of the time. And it was the people taking care of us and cooking our food and going to the market to buy groceries, and putting us to sleep while parents are being parents and either being social or working or what have you. So it's a kind of a ride through that, through the lives of people that we wouldn't otherwise think to kind of stop and ask, hey, what's your dream?
Nice. So before we talk about the book, I do want you to tell me about the cover art, and everyone can see this, why you chose this illustration.
I actually didn't. The publishers did. The publishers did, and they sent it to me, and I liked it because it really doesn't give anything away. I'm a fan of, I guess I was just a fan of the subtlety. So you pick it up and you're looking at it has bits and pieces of something that may coalesce together and make something up, whether it's a picture, whether it's an arrangement. And that's what the stories are like. They're not disparate, but they're connected, and they exist as these images do, all on their own. And the bowl at the end kind of just brings it all together as a whole. I would say that that's the city of Dhaka. It's kind of holding up these people that are in it and living in it and surviving in it and making it. So they sent it to me, and I said, yeah, I think we can go with that.
I mean, it was really interesting to me because when I was looking at it, and I'm glad that you describe it as a bowl, because I was thinking of the salad bowl theory while looking at this.
Yeah.
The salad bowl theory of immigration, where other cultures come in together and kind of create the United States.
That's right.
Usually referred to as. So
that's all this country is. Yeah.
Maybe I was thinking too much into it.
No, I like that.
But
I believe me, that's what I do with my time. Everything is thought into. I will say that the first iteration of this book, it was published in Bangladesh actually first, and by Bengal Lights Publications as Days and Nights in the City. And then they had the partnership with Unnamed, and then Unnamed released it here in the US. So shout out always to the people that really kind of supported it from the ground up first, and then saw it through here. So all I did was sat back and enjoyed working with wonderful publishers and editors and lovers of literature.
I actually really like the title. How was the reception back home for this book?
When I was I recently, and by recently I mean at this point 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Dhaka for about a year. I went to live there between 2017 and 18. And I met a lot of young people because I was teaching at 2 institutions, and those students, now former students, kind of became my unofficial line into. They became they became big fans of my work too, and it was thrilling to see so much enthusiasm among young people about writing and literature. Again, I'm coming from a place where all of that is suppressed because that's frivolous. Don't do that. Go study something that's going to make you a better life and earn you money. You can do all the frivolous stuff later, frivolous being art of any kind. So the reception, as far as I know, has been warm. I've there have been reviews. I have had other conversations with academics, journalists, other writers. I've been in panels. So from what I have heard so far, it's been appreciated, and that's big because that's really my readership. Something that also is part of kind of becoming the writer that I am, eventually, is that I've kind of accepted in a really good way that I'm not interested in what the mainstream here has to say. I know who the readers are, and they will always read differently. Now, of course, I've had terrific readers here as well, who have read it with no context, but they've just read it exactly for what it is. It's a book about people. Stories are human, and that's been terrific. So while that's happening, I embrace that, and at the same time, I'm mindful that the people that are really reading it are going to read and be like, oh, wait, just as it happened to me, I didn't think we could be in stories like this, where the stuff of books and to be able to do that, is really fulfilling.
I mean, I would definitely uphold that. It's a great book, so I stand by all of those. Yeah,
thank you.
feedback.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And then, so I want to know, which story is your favorite and why?
I have to say that one of the first one that got published, and this is kind of saying the one that got published was the favorite one, but it just so happened that the story that's titled The Father and the Judge was published by Roanoke Review under the title Adulterous, which, if since you've read it, you understand why that was the original title. And The Father and the Judge was chosen by the publisher. I was okay with it as long as the content was what it is. And I would say that one sticks out because when it got published, I had no idea that this book was coming together. So I also recall kind of having a lot of tense fun writing it because of the subject matter. And I just kind of went with it because it's nothing that I experienced. I have no idea what it's like to be the daughter or the father. The judge's character happened because characters like that have cropped up before. He's the one that's in the position of power and privilege. So I've known people like that, meaning through family and connections with my parents, elders, and so forth. So I would say that one really kind of pushed me in a good way, which then sort of set the stage for the other ones, because I went, okay, since I went here, let me go with, for example, the first story, up in the main house. And then the caretaker's dilemma. Again, I have no idea. I just saw this. I just had this image of this person who's devoted his life to this powerful family. And now he is at a crossroads where he's like, I don't want to ask for help, but there's no way I can't. Have I heard those, kinds of bits and pieces? Yeah. People that, for example, coming to my grandparents and saying, our village is no longer what it was when your people were there. Everything's being taken away. What do I do? So, but to answer your original question, I would say The Father and the Judge was kind of a nice pivoting point, and I really enjoyed writing that story.
Okay. So since you were telling us about your favorite story, can you read us a passage from one of your favorites? It doesn't even have to be this one if you don't want to.
Yeah, I can. I've picked out. I'll just read the opening of The Father and the Judge, since we've talked it up.
Mm-hmm.
The Father and the Judge. The father arrived before dawn. He accepted a glass of water from the servant boy, and after drinking all of it in one gulp, stood by the main gate, gazing wistfully at the ground. He was a middle-aged man in good health, tall and slender, white hair combed back, bristly white eyebrows over curious eyes, full lips the color of plums. His typed letter had come by post a week ago. Now the judge wished he could take back his response, agreeing to see him. He was from the village in Sylhet, where the old Qureshi mansion still stood. For years, the landlord A.R. Qureshi had lived in the house and overseen the family lands, and the tenants who lived under his protection answered to him. Back then, it was common knowledge that all matters, large or small, in spite of being under the jurisprudence of the erstwhile village council, presently the bureaucratic stranglehold known as the Jilla Parishad, ultimately required a Qureshi stamp. Now, no Qureshis remain in the village. The house was locked up. The judge had paid the place a visit shortly after the landlord's death, found it dismal, and had no reason to want to return. His third cousin, Wasim Qureshi, had taken the mansion under his charge, along with a bungalow and small tea factory in Srimangal. The servant boy brought tea and set it on the cane table. The judge asked if the man had said anything, asked for food, or had given any, but the boy shook his head. So that's the opening page of the story.
That's amazing. I think that was one of my favorite stories. And there's just something about your writing where you take all of this time to set up an elaborate, setting of where the story is happening, what's happening, who's in it. And then you do this like quick pivot into something that the story is, you didn't see it coming at all. And I kind of feel like, I'm someone who loves mysteries and thrillers. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of gave me that fulfillment in a sense, but it also didn't, because I'm reading this whole story and I'm like, wait, this is gonna happen, and then nothing remotely close to that happens. So that was something that really kept me reading. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Well, it really doesn't matter, because you've just said everything that a writer can hope for to keep a reader reading. And I really appreciate your kind of tuning into the setup, because I more and more I just accept that that's the kind of writer I am. I like taking a little time. I often cringe at, when I hear agents or publishers saying things like, "Oh, give me a good hook."
Mhm.
And I don't know what that is. I was like, well, the entire book is the hook.
Yeah.
So if you read the first page, then you read the second and you read the second. And yes, it is my job as a writer to keep you reading as much as, I've been, interested in writing the book. But this whole idea of just, grab me in the first line, I was like, I don't know what grabs you. So I could look at 10 other books on the shelves out there that have been published and try to copy whatever it is that I think is a good hook. That I'm not interested in doing that. So, I resigned to just writing however I want to. And then what is important to me is when I'm working with the editor, when I'm doing my revisions, and then when I'm working with an editor, when the book gets to that point, and then for reasons that will benefit the story or the book itself, then I can go in and say, okay, we can do this here, we can do that there, we can shape this, we can cut this, we can add this. But coming into it with, that idea of like, oh, let me think up a really good line, I will never get a day's work done because I don't know what a good line is. I might think
Yeah.
my line is fantastic. Somebody might say it's not even a full sentence. So,
Mhm.
those are so subjective. But I'm really, it's really heartening to hear that, for lack of a better phrase, you got it. You got what was happening. It was a slow burn, and yes, there's many things going on that are not what is happening in this world. I'm hearing
Mhm.
this from here, I'm hearing that from here. I do remember that being kind of what was like the turning mechanism in the story, that I don't know who I'm going to believe. And so the father is telling the truth. The judge is, has his questions. The daughter's situation is the truth. Now, who's going to believe whom?
Right.
And then give it that space of truth.
Mhm. Another story that I was thinking about was dual income, and for the lack of a better word, it infuriated me because you take, it's like a 20-page story, and you take 18 pages to talk about this interview and how they're gonna have dual incomes, and then I'm not gonna give away the ending, but the climax was just nothing I'd expected, but it still completely made sense in the background of what was happening. And so this idea of, normal people dealing with normal people problems with the background of huge world catastrophes kind of thing. It resonates definitely with the world that we are in right now, but even it's just the way that you've captured it is, amazing. And I can't think of a way to do that, even just if I was writing this kind of thing. So you did a great job with that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Something that I've perhaps even that at the writing of these stories was happening that I now can kind of give more of a name is, I find so satisfying when not just expectations are defied, but everything I'm guessing becomes, those are just my assumptions because that's not how the world works. Anything can go any which way at any time. So yeah, I could be setting out for a job interview. That's all I know. And in my mind, I do see myself reaching the place, having the interview for better or worse, and then coming home or going about my day. But between here and there, who knows what will happen, it's something that I talk about with students as well. I go, you're going through your life every day, but there's that one day that is different than any other. That's the story. So, you're walking from your dorm to class, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, all of a sudden you're like, is that who I think it is? And it's a friend you haven't seen in 15 years. And they've come out of nowhere and they found you and they're like, hey, we have some unfinished business. There's the story right there. And it could be, they could meet for a cup of coffee. They could meet for an hour, they could meet for 5 minutes and have a moment where it's still not fleshed out, but we still get a glimpse of, oh, last time we saw each other, you did this to me, I did this to you. It's still unresolved. I don't know that I want to go there anymore. And you just keep going. So there isn't this big blowout, which is what we would be expecting. But it's that tension of like, oh, it almost happened. They almost resolved this. And we see what the tension is, but that is not how life always works out. And they have this little moment and they go, I'm going to go to class now. And I hope you have a good life. But this is going to stay. And this is as close to a resolution as what we're going to come to.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is exactly what I was experiencing reading the book, this, sheer unsatisfaction of confrontation between characters, which I feel like, even when we're living our lives, we definitely try, well, at least, most people try to avoid that confrontation and kind of just continue on with what they consider their happy lives. And so I mean, you expect media to give you a resolution. And so, yeah, it's very different in that sense. And so I do want to mention that your book, plays with bigger world issues in the background, which we've already mentioned. And so there are issues such as global warming, domestic violence, capitalism, problems in the justice system, ethics, or even, like killing females at birth, and everything that's constant, whether you call it South Asian society or just society in general. And so you even talk about the liberation war with Pakistan a lot during the book. And so, tell us about whether any of it was autobiographical or, to what extent you were channeling some things that you've known, at least.
I think it's certainly more of the latter than it is the former. So, I'm open. I'm pretty, not just open, but I'm vocal about, my political leanings, convictions, whatever you want to call them. So everything that you mentioned, subconsciously or consciously, kind of keeps talking to the stories and the work that I write. So, for example, you mentioned the Liberation War. That's my first novel, In the Time of the Others, which takes place in the time of that war. And that's something that I grew up with. I was born 5 years after the war. And so my parents are of that war generation. Their parents were the partition generation. Mine are the Liberation 1971 generation. And so anything that any discussion, doesn't matter when, where, in the car, at dinner, in the den, sleepover, what have you, uncle's, aunt's house, if the adults are talking, 9 times to 10 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, remember when this and this and this was happening? And then 71, the war broke out. It was such a pivotal kind of consciousness forming event that I would listen to these stories and I would be like, this is better than any movie I've seen, and these are real people that my parents they're talking about, hiding at night when soldiers are knocking on the door, curfews and stops in the street, 60 people kind of a death squad coming into my grandparents' room saying, oh, we're looking for Bengali miscreants, was the word that they used. Are you hiding them? Are you hiding weapons? So these just amazing stories that defied my reality, and they were just as real. So, I don't really come into a story consciously with any of those kind of broader thematic elements. I'll write a story based on an image. Something will come to me, a first line or an image, and that's all I'm going to know. And it could be with the father and the judge. I just saw this dad exactly the way that I described him standing kind of in this kind of, he's proud, but he also has to bow to this authority. That's it. I just had that image. And then in came, well, why is he there? Oh, there's something that is so incredibly crucial and important. He's run out of getting any kind of help from anywhere. Oh, then what is that? What could be that, above land or property or losing your home? What could be that? Well, family. And then what about family? Well, it's all the more complex as it is, because it's the situation of the daughter, who would have a lot more agency if things weren't as they were. And then, I'll tie in whatever it is that kind of informs or contextualizes. And 71, as it happens, crops up in many other stories that I've written since this book as well, depending on the people and the generation that I'm talking about. So I'm, again, as I said, if I sat down to say, well, I'm going to write a story that's going to directly address, global warming, I could do that. And, there's more than enough for me to kind of find and put together. But if it happens naturally, that's when I get more excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you take such huge concepts and you just kind of put them there for a second and then you just move on. And so it's up to the reader to, dwell on what's more important, because it's more important in the characters' lives to do whatever they're going about than, to deal with global warming. And so, yeah, that's just great. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about, the South Asian culture within this book, I would say. And so how did you manage to capture the subtleties of, South Asian tradition? Because like an example that I would mention would be, again, from The Father and the Judge, where, the judge is trying to give the dad in the story money for whatever he needed, and the first thing is to say, oh, no, this is too much. And so you have to do that formality before you accept the money. And so that was very like a small bit of South Asian culture. Yes. And so talk to the audience about how you captured those subtleties.
So I think when we speak from a cultural aspect, no matter what the culture is, there are certain isms, right? There's a very Bengali way of doing something. There's a very, this is a very Dhaka way of saying this. This is a very West Bengal way of saying this. This is, Bengal and Bengali culture being kind of my framing perspective. And as it were, the two Bengals, we have our kind of sparring and tongue-in-cheekiness as well. But then, I'm a big fan of Satyajit Ray. I love his works. His detective novels were formative to me, and I love his movies. And when I watch it, I go, oh my gosh, that's dad, or that's my grandpa. That's what he would do. We would walk in the door and they would go, hey, which one is it? Get in here. I can't see, get closer. Which one are you? Oh, okay. So all of these kind of bits and pieces that make up our lives, that surround us, they just kind of bring themselves. So in order for me to identify one isn't much of a stretch. It's just like, oh, okay, I know this person, I know this grandparent. And yes, while what I know about this grandparent is the specifics are that, oh, my grandmother talked this way. That's the specific. And the general is that, oh yeah, then there's, 5 other grandmothers, of friends that I would visit. They would talk the same way, just different language, different, different phrases. Hey, get over here, come, let me see your face, how grown up you are. And then also, whether it's, couples, spouses, friends, colleagues, these are all kind of collected information that, going back to the beginning of our session, that I was saying, they were always there. I just didn't think that they were, writing worthy, because as I said, writing fiction to me was not something I could use myself and my world to put out there, because fiction was this kind of, it's an ivory tower, and all the great works have been about these people. So write them and you'll become a writer, big time or famous or what have you writer. But yeah, that's it. It's just observations, consciously, subconsciously, and then just kind of now going, oh, I remember that. Yeah, I can, that'll be a perfect touch to a character if a person just adds this bit of this kind of a verbal tick to something. Somebody, South Asian or Bengali will completely recognize, this kind of small, quick interaction between two people based on class or based on age or based on, status, including, at least in the world of this book, interactions between men and women, which are not as frank if you're not from the family, or if you're not married, friend's wife, brother, sister-in-law, cousin, what have you. We know how to interact, and then there's certain tongue-in-cheek and certain kind of really kind of warm ways of interacting with them. But also, it's very Bengali, it's very South Asian. And if I wanted to replicate that over here, my friend's wife might be like, why are you being so weird with me? Come here, give me a hug. And maybe I don't hug friends' wives in talk all the time or at all.
Yeah, I mean, this brings up a point that I've noticed between just immigrant writers in general, that they fall into this void of, over-explaining tradition or over-explaining, definitions. And so a story that comes to mind is The Happy Widow, when it's just Rosie and her neighbor, they always drink tea together, and you mentioned that they drink ginger tea, and I'm just reading the book and I'm like, yeah, ginger tea, whatever. And then I think, oh my gosh, it's adrak wali chai, and so that that just adds a different layer for me, saying like, oh well, they must be like good neighbors when they drink chai together every day, because it's a very big deal. And so in that sense, did you think that you were almost falling into this void, or did you not think of a US audience for this book when writing?
At the time that these stories go back, which at this point is more than 10 years, at least 10 years, some of them, it was a struggle, because struggle as in, I was also trying to navigate this incredibly frustrating and infuriating world known as the US publishing world, with agents or publishers. And so, it was the tension was between exactly what you pointed out. Is it my job to explain? Or is it the reader's job to come in as a reader and do their part of the work as well? So to look at it another way, when I've read, whether it's British or French or German authors, there's always an assumption that we'll know what German culture is, or what French culture is, what English culture is. These are, of course, assumptions coming out of colonization and power structures and knowledge. But at the same time, I would, in high school, I would be like, I'll just keep my mouth shut because I don't know how to say this French phrase that's right in the middle of this novel, as if I'm supposed to just know it. And then I said, well, then how about I just stop a French person on the street of Paris and just say something to them in Bangla, and or a person who's reading it, who's reading my book in English, but then I have Bangla phrases, and I have to give them a glossary. Well, no, it goes both ways. So reading, I'm saying, is an active part, and of course, I want people to have to get into the stories, to make up their minds how they feel about them on their own. But I do think that any kind of reading is we're in it together. Yes, the book is yours to interpret as you will once it's out of my hands. But to answer your question, no, the more I write, the more I work, the less I don't explain, unless the explaining has everything to do with the book itself, with the story itself. I'm not going to break down. I'm just going to say, if I want to say, this so-and-so person wore a jamdani shari. Well, I know what a jamdani shari is, and I know that, at least, 300, 20 million people will know what a jamdani shari is. That's a lot of people. So if one person doesn't know, guess what? This is an invitation. Find out what a jamdani shari is. So yeah, I don't feel at all compelled to explain.
I love that, and I'm glad you don't, because I think it's almost expected from the East to do that.
Yes.
And so, yeah. Anyways, let's move on to another passage from one of your favorites, if you'd like to read for us.
Sure. So this is the opening of The Forced Witness. Over the V created by two shoulders just below his eye level, Nur Muhammad could see the hole in the bay window, a jagged, yawning O, and the three constables who were stooped over the shards of glass on the pavement below the window ledge like pecking roosters. A thick-necked inspector, tapping his nightstick against his leg, was maintaining a stance of constant intimidation, without needing to, as he interrogated the servants. Four men lined up in a single row. Nur, along with the other gawkers, all servants from surrounding homes, stood outside the main gate that had been opened all the way to accommodate the police jeep parked halfway into the driveway. Fourth one in a week, the police wanted to write them off as acts of vandalism, chalking them up to the fact that a spate of American, British families with teenagers had recently moved into the area. But when valuables worth thousands were found lifted out of living rooms and bedrooms, official notions began to change. By the standards of the Gulshan district, it was a crime wave. Two on this street where Nur Muhammad stood with the crowds outside his neighbor's gate, one on the next street over, and another, the first one, on the street closest to Airport Road. Coincidentally, the first one had occurred at the house next door to one of the foreign families, and for that reason alone, had originally stoked police suspicion toward the kids.
I just hope that people buy this book because I really want them to know how it ends. But moving on to, we have a question from the audience.
Sure.
And so Himank asks, can you tell us about one of the most touching instances you had during your stay in Dhaka, which made you feel you should tell this story?
Wow, great question. I would say this story speaks to that. So instead of one touching moments, there are many. So just Nur Muhammad's complete inability to have any kind of power over what eventually happens to him in the course of the story. Why? Well, because he doesn't have the means, he doesn't have the money. It's a corrupt system. You have to grease palms. That inspector is not going to give Nur the time of day, much less, even care about his humanity, until and unless someone like the judge gets in the cop's face and says, "Do you know who I am?" And then, or if suddenly Nur had access to money with which he can tell the inspector to at least listen to him for 5 minutes. So between that and, just this kind of general, as I said, the people that even recently when I was there, just kind of observing, looking around, kind of understanding all the privileges I've had and all that is not possible to so many. So, I may sound kind of, this may sound like exaggeratedly maudlin, but for example, when I'm on the road, going from one place to the next, seeing little 10-year-old kids being the conductors in those like makeshift illegal transport trucks. They don't have like license plates or anything, but they're used to their public transportation, and they have like a kid about this big, with money like in his fingers, herding the passengers in and taking their money, taking their ticket, and this kid is like hanging from the back of the truck, 10-year-old kid, bare feet, and this truck is going through traffic that I don't want to, be caught driving in. So it's a collection of moments like that makes me go, good grief. I could write to understand this chaos. And I'm just going to open up more questions.
Awesome. So I did want to ask you, how is this book different from the other books that you've written?
I don't think it's much different. It's just formally these are short stories. As far as the novel, in the time of the others, while it's in a specific time period and has to do with a specific backdrop, and kind of that locks it in. A lot of what's goes on also has to do with these tensions between power and privilege, and at the same time class, and have and have not, voice and not heard. So I kind of accepted that until something completely out of this wheelhouse hits me, this is kind of this is where my mind's going to be for at least right now. Let's see if again something compels me that's so out of this wheelhouse that I have to go there. So they have this connection, and it's the same with the upcoming book.
Right. Since you brought it up, I would love for you to talk about it a little bit more, and when and where we can buy it.
Yeah. It's as I said, it's called The Inheritors. It takes place in contemporary Dhaka. It is I wouldn't say adaptation. It is a retelling. I would say retelling, refashioning of The Great Gatsby, and I'm told later this year. So there are no dates yet set because we're still in the process of finalizing everything. As soon as there's a date, believe me, I will trumpet it, and I'll make sure word gets to you as well. And it's going to be with Hachette. It's coming out in the subcontinent. I don't know about when it'll be published here in the West, because, as I said, my agent is pitching it to the UK and the US. But, as I said, I still can't make heads or tails of the US publishing industry. So best I can say is, if somebody is hooked by it, maybe they'll pick it up. But I still think, again, the people that I really want to get a hold of the book will be the ones that have access to it first, because it'll be widely circulated in by Hachette in the subcontinent.
Of course, that's amazing, and I'm excited. My last question for you is, would you be open to it being, to at least up in the main house, being, translated into other mediums or channels? Like, because I feel like the stories in this would be perfect for like a Netflix mini series or something.
I would
like
love that. I would love
Yeah.
that. I would love that. I love film. I love TV. My wife is a theater professional and professor and actor and director. So yes, and I love collaborations when it comes to those specific spaces. Yeah, it'd be great. Just to
I
see
hope to-
who plays what, and what somebody else's vision is that writes a screenplay of it, or wants to bring in their own eyes to it. Yeah.
Right. I hope to see this happen someday.
Me too.
But thank you so much for
You're very
being with
welcome.
us
Thank you.
tonight. Thank you. And I had a great time talking to you and getting more insight into these amazing stories that I just read. And so thank you for being part of the DC South Asian Literary Festival, and off to you, Nacha.
Thank you.
Professor Nadeem, thank you so much. I have been so inspired by this. Really, as an immigrant myself, I moved here when I was 18, and it really speaks to me. And I am putting your book on my Amazon cart right now as we speak. Thank you, Snegda, for moderating this panel, and hopefully we'll collaborate in the future and stay in
Yes, let's
touch.
please do that. Thank you.
Thank you so
both
much,
so
everyone.
very much. All best wishes to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.